Good morning and welcome to another beautiful Anzac Day here in Adelaide as we commemorate the sacrifice of those who have served in the country's Defence Forces. I'm Richard Davies and this is my ABC colleague Jessica Harmson. I'm also here with the RSL Ambassador Bill Denny. And Jess, every year brings into focus the significant moments in the Anzac story. Yes,
that's right, Richard. Good morning. Well, it's been 80 years since the end of World War II and 110 years since the landings at Gallipoli. Sadly, there are no longer any surviving World War I veterans, and the number of World War II veterans gets considerably less each year. Bill, what sort of impact does that have on Anzac Day commemorations?
I think, Jess, in one sense, we are losing a significant part of what we come to commemorate, and that is the passing of all those World War II veterans. There were 54,000 of them, and now we'd only have a handful, not many more. But it does cause us to focus on the following generations, those that went to Vietnam and subsequently, and we maintain our Anzac commemoration through them.
And it's good to see so many people here this morning. So wherever you are, do stay with us throughout the morning. We'll be live with the march. It's expected to get underway in about half an hour's time, but for now we're going to take you right back to the start of Anzac Day, and that's the dawn service at the National War Memorial on North Terrace. And our coverage begins with the arrival of the Governor, Her Excellency the Honourable Francis Adamson.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for the arrival of the Governor of South Australia, Her Excellency the Honourable Francis Adamson AC, and Mr Bunton. Namani. Nainari Ian Smith, Mananda Budni. Good morning, Your Excellency and Mr Bunton, and everyone here, or listening, or watching, wherever you are in the state. My name is Ian Smith. On behalf of the Acting State President of the Return and Services League, Meredith Burgess, I welcome you to this dawn service. We're very pleased so many of you have joined us here this morning. Gana yata ana, nadlu tampinthi nadlu, Gana yatanga imperinthi. These words acknowledge in the Gana language that we're meeting on Gana land. The RSL acknowledges this memorial is built on the traditional lands of the Gana people and pays respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations. We pay our respects to the first peoples of these lands, both past and present, and especially to the thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have served this country in uniform despite the discrimination they have faced and the obstacles that have been placed in their way. Kia ora to our New Zealand comrades, represented here by Wing Commander Bex Maynard of the Te Tawarangi Aotearoa, I hope I got that right, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and Hoşgeldiniz to the people of Turkey, represented by Ms Berna Kardis from the Turkish Association of South Australia. 100 years ago today, commemorative ceremonies and services were held marking the 10th anniversary of the Gallipoli landing. In Adelaide in 1925, a march was held and a service was conducted at the Cross of Sacrifice in Pennington Gardens because the striking memorial around which we are gathered this morning was not completed until 1931. 125 years ago, South Australian colonial troops were fighting in South Africa during the Second Boer War, and Her Majesty's colonial ship Protector sailed to China as part of this colony's response to the Boxer Rebellion. From a population of less than 5 million, 331,000 Australians served overseas in the First World War. Of the 35,000 South Australians who served, more than 5,000 died. 300 South Australian women served with the Australian Army Nursing Service. No community across this state could have been left untouched by the scale of the loss. Few families were. The grief felt right across the country resulted in generational trauma that is still felt today. For years afterwards, funeral processions snaked out of the historic Diggers Hospital at Keswick Barracks to the Australian Imperial Force Cemetery at West Terrace, carrying those who had finally succumbed to their wounds. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and the battles that brought it to a close. In 1945, Australians fought for the liberation of Western Europe and the Philippines, and closer to home fought in the New Britain, Bougainville, Aitape-Wewak and Borneo campaigns. After the surrender of Japan in August, general demobilisation began in October 1945. 75 years ago, Australian naval, ground and air forces were committed to the Korean War, a conflict in which more than 17,000 Australians served, of whom 340 died and another 1,216 were wounded. In 1950, Australia also began its commitment to the Malayan emergency. 70 years ago, Australia committed mostly naval forces to the Far East Strategic Reserve and helped build the Air Force Base in Butterworth, Malaya, now Malaysia, which hosted continuous deployments of Australian Air Force and Army elements for decades. 65 years ago, the Malayan emergency was declared over, and 60 years ago, the first Australian combat force was sent to South Vietnam, and also in 1965, Australia committed forces to the Indonesian confrontation. In 1970, the Prime Minister announced that Australia would be drawing down its forces in South Vietnam. 60,000 Australians served in Vietnam. 523 lost their lives as a result of that war, and over 3,000 were wounded. 50 years ago today, the Australian Embassy in Saigon was evacuated just prior to the fall of Saigon on the 30th of April 1975. The fall of Saigon is a very sad day for the Vietnamese community here in South Australia who came as refugees after the war and will be commemorated at the Vietnam War Memorial adjacent to the Torrens Parade Ground next Wednesday at 11 a.m, and all are welcome. 1975 also saw the involvement of the Air Force in evacuating Australian citizens and foreign nationals from South Vietnam, including Operation Baby Lift, which evacuated orphaned Vietnamese children to Australia. 1985 saw the withdrawal of Australian troops from the United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, a 35-year commitment to peace in Kashmir, and one of more than 100 peacekeeping and humanitarian missions Australians have served on since 1947. Other missions with significant anniversaries this year include those in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, Namibia, Iran, Iraq, Rwanda, East Timor, Solomon Islands, Ethiopia and Eritrea, and Sudan. Hundreds of members of the Australian Defence Force are currently serving on operations from border protection and peacekeeping to maritime security and assistance missions. This includes personnel deployed to the United Kingdom on Operation Kudu to help train members of the Armed Forces of Ukraine to help defend their homeland from invasion. Given the intense fighting that continues in the Middle East, we keep in the forefront of our minds the 12 Defence Force personnel currently serving with the United Nations Truce Supervision Organisation in Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon and Syria, and the 30 members serving with the multinational force and observers in the Sinai in Egypt. On the 14th of August 1945, Air Force personnel at Northwest Area Headquarters in Darwin received a short teleprinter message. Cancel all operations against the enemy forthwith, including missions now airborne. In this way, they became aware of the long-awaited news that Japan had accepted the Allies' terms of unconditional surrender and that the Second World War was over. After appeasement had failed, Australia had joined the fight at the very beginning of the war in response to the September 1939 German invasion of Poland, almost 6 years earlier. The generation that had grown up in the aftermath of the First World War and had then endured the deprivations of the Great Depression faced its greatest challenge. A trio of brutal, authoritarian, militaristic and racist dictatorships sought to subjugate and enslave the people of neighbouring countries and ruthlessly exploit their resources for their own benefit, killing tens of millions in the process. The young people some call the greatest generation answered that call. From a population of less than 7 million, more than 1 million Australians served this country in the armed forces and the merchant navy. Each service created its own women's service to release men to fight overseas, and thousands more women served in the nursing services. Over 70,000 Australian women serving in uniform during the war. Tens of thousands of civilians directly supported the war effort, and everyone tightened their belts to give our forces the best support that they could. Nearly 40,000 young Australians died as a result of the Second World War. Of the 22,000 captured by the Japanese, mostly army, over a third had died by August 1945 due to the unrelenting slave labour, malnutrition, appalling conditions and outright murder. During the war, the most dangerous single theatre of operations for all Australians was the air war over Europe, which claimed 20% of all Australian combat losses. Over 4,000 Australian aviators of Bomber Command died in the Second World War. A third of all Australian Bomber Command aviators were killed. The Navy too suffered terrible losses, starting with the sinking of HMAS Sydney with all hands in 1941, and then HMAS Perth in the Battle of Sunda Strait in 1942. HMAS Perth lost half of her 680-man crew in the sinking and another 100 in Japanese prisoner of war camps. A total of 34 ships were lost during the war. The generation that fought the Second World War exemplifies the ethics of duty and sacrifice, of placing the welfare of others ahead of themselves. The debt we owe them is incalculable. By their willingness to serve, to fight and to die for their fellow Australians, they won for future generations a victory over rapacious totalitarianism that has allowed the people of Australia to live in relative peace for 80 years, and also to attract people from around the world who wanted to share in the peace and security we have enjoyed. In these uncertain times, we can draw strength from the lessons and sacrifices of the generation that fought the Second World War and ensure we protect and sustain their legacy. Age certainly has wearied the veterans of the Second World War who are still amongst us. Almost all of them are centenarians now. Only a few dozen are able to participate in commemorations around the state. Some of them will be marching today. If you are lining the route, please thank them for their service. Today we remember the service and sacrifice of all Australians who have served our nation in wars and conflicts since the Second World War. In the last resort, they are the ones we have relied upon to protect us, our way of life and our democratic freedoms. Like people all over the world, we draw strength from our history. It is hard to go past the example of the prisoners of war of the Japanese on the Sandakan death marches in early 1945 for an inspiring example of enduring hardship and in demonstrating resilience. Courage, daring and self-belief in the face of extreme danger is exemplified by men like Tom Diver Derrick and Bill Kibbe, South Australians who were awarded the Victoria Cross in the Second World War, and the two South Australians who were awarded the George Cross during the war, Lionel Matthews and George Goss. The Bomber Command crews who, despite horrific losses, continued to answer the call and climb into their aircraft for yet another mission over Germany, and the nurses who stood together in the surf at Raji Beach on Banker Island while they were machine gunned, epitomised the high standards of shared honour and responsibility that we expect the members of our Defence Force to exhibit when faced with death and adversity. Today we also acknowledge our allies, those who have stood shoulder to shoulder with us in both world wars and in many conflicts and operations since, especially the people of New Zealand, with whom we share a special bond forged on the rocky hills of Gallipoli, which was renewed in the skies above Europe in the Second World War and in the work of the British Pacific Fleet and in many wars and operations since. We remember too the high costs paid by those that we fought in those conflicts and recognise that the passing of time often leads us to reconcile our differences and embrace nations and peoples that were once our implacable enemies. Our close relationship with the Turkish people is a testament to that. The conflicts raging today in Ukraine and Gaza remind us that warfare is brutal, destructive and costly, an experience that often takes a severe toll from the civilian population as well as from those who fight. It often leaves permanent marks on those who endure it, physically, mentally, spiritually and emotionally. The Wall of Remembrance, which is behind this memorial along the wall of Government House, lists the names of 3,323 South Australians who died as a result of their service in the Second World War. Together, the memorials in this precinct hold nearly 9,000 names, which are a permanent reminder to us all of the cost of war. Each name represents a grieving partner or sweetheart, siblings, children and parents. Remembering the reality of war reminds us of the value of the peace that the greatest generation won for us and the security and prosperity that peace can bring. Service in the Defence Force inspires the ancient virtues of courage, loyalty, selflessness and comradeship. It is a combination that can be utterly intoxicating, and veterans returning home or leaving the services can feel a deep sense of alienation in the new environment, causing isolation and depression in some. Many veterans commemorating alone in Australia, New Zealand and across the world will be missing their mates and finding Anzac Day hard. Many would appreciate a call from former comrades, friends and family. As we pause to remember and honour the fallen, we must also guard our Anzac traditions against the heedless nationalism sometimes promoted by those who do not understand what Anzac Day is about. We must also be wary of those who seek to misuse the service and sacrifice of our veterans to promote their own agendas. Actions such as those of the black-clad neo-Nazis who stood on the steps of this sacred memorial on Australia Day. These actions are unwelcome, and we must protect ourselves and our Anzac traditions from them and the racist and totalitarian ideologies that the veterans of the Second World War fought and died to defeat. Likewise, Anzac Day has never been about glorification of war or success in battle. After all, our Anzac traditions spring from a disaster that cost the lives of 8,700 Australians and maimed 3 times as many, but failed to achieve its aims. Anzac Day has a single focus: the commemoration of Australian and New Zealand veterans who offered and often sacrificed their lives for us. It is a time that we acknowledge we're commemorating a willingness to serve and sacrifice for a country and its people. This applies just as much to our young people currently serving on peacekeeping, border protection and other operations as it did to those who served in the trenches and in the hills of Gallipoli in the First World War. It is also the time that we acknowledge that we have a duty as a society to support those who have lost their loved ones to a war or its aftermath, as each death leaves a trail of human heartbreak. We also have a responsibility to embrace our wounded veterans of all conflicts, some of whom are still coming to terms with how their service has altered the path of their lives and those of their families. Sadly, this process can result in family breakdown and homelessness, and has seen hundreds of our veterans take their own lives. To mark the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, I would now like to invite Her Excellency the Governor to place a wreath on the wall of remembrance to the South Australian dead of the Second World War.
Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. In a moment, we will have the laying of wreaths, the hymn, followed by the ode, last post, a minute's silence, and reveille. A brief word of explanation. A memorial such as this represents our fallen. Memorials are made to symbolise the bodies of those who may be lost or buried far away. This symbolises them being before us this morning. In ancient times, a deceased body of an important person waiting for burial might be laid on a large stone, a catafalque, and guarded by soldiers. This is why we have a catafalque party bearing arms, respectfully guarding and protecting the fallen. Wreaths have been used since ancient times to honour courage and bravery, as well as for mourning. If you were to stay in barracks, you would be woken each morning by the trumpet playing of the rouse or reveille and sent to sleep at night with the last post. Here this morning they are reversed deliberately. The last post played first signifies that our brave and courageous fallen have now gone to sleep in death. And our minute's silence is to let them rest, to not awaken them. The flag goes to half-mast, symbolising our grief and our sadness. But then the silence is broken by a reveille, a call to wake up. This expresses the hope we have that death is not the end of our story. Instead, we look forward to resurrection. And so the flag returns to full mast, declaring that death will ultimately be defeated and that our hope for new life wins the day, thanks to our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, and the one who becomes our eternal home.
Thank you very much, Padre. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite our senior guests to place a wreath or tribute on the memorial. The first wreath and tribute will be placed by Her Excellency the Governor and Mr Bunton. Meredith Burgess, Acting State President of the Return and Services League, Wing Commander Bex Maynard, representing the New Zealand High Commissioner, and Ms Bernakardis, representing the Turkish Association of South Australia. The Honourable Peter Malinauskas, MP, Premier of South Australia. Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, representing the Prime Minister. The following ex-service and kindred organisations are now invited to place a wreath or tribute. The Naval Association of Australia SA Section, the Royal Australian Regiment Association South Australia, the Air Force Association South Australian Division, the Legacy Club of Adelaide, and Australian War Widows.
Our second hymn is the recessional, which, as we have said, speaks to us of the presence of God with us in all things, even in the midst of battle. And it asks us to remember that and to be encouraged and strengthened in this.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
We've gathered here on this sacred place at this special time as we do each April 25. As we have remembered our fallen across various wars and conflicts and all who have served this and other nations with great courage, commitment and sacrifice, let your hearts be filled with respect and gratitude. And may you be strengthened with resolve to love and to serve one another, to do good, to stand for what is right and just, even in the face of opposition, and to show mercy to the wounded, the struggling and the brokenhearted. On this Anzac morning, I pray God's grace, blessing and power for you, and in particular for our veterans and their families. Amen.
And that's this morning's dawn service on North Terrace, finishing there with the national anthem. We're live now on King William Road for the Anzac March here in Adelaide, and crowds are starting to arrive ahead of the march. I'm Richard Davies. The commentating team with me here today is the RSL Ambassador Bill Denny and my colleague Jess Harmson. Good morning to you both. It's great to see so many people here this morning, Bill.
It is, yes. All come to acknowledge the sacrifices given by so many and so freely without any expectation of reward. So should point out, Richard, that we'll see a lot of marches today. Not all our veterans saw active service, but the RSL wants to make the point that it's important to note that every single person who enlisted offered themselves for active service, and today is about honouring that offer and remembering those that suffered or died consequent upon their service.
And we're already seeing our first group, the South Australia Mounted Police. They traditionally head a march of almost all major ceremonial activities in South Australia.
And today's march, of course, as in past years, follows a specific order, starting with the Navy, followed by the Army, and then the Air Force.
Yeah. Reviewing the march today is our State Governor, Her Excellency Frances Adamson, AC. Her Excellency is accompanied by her husband, Mr Rod Bunton. Mr Bunton's father, Charles, served in the RAF and Transport Command in World War II. And Her Excellency and Mr Bunton are tireless in support of all of us, and very few of us have not been touched by the way Her Excellency's services since she was appointed in 2021. And also on the dais is the Minister for Veteran Affairs, Joe Sockarch, who has a military link through his in-law who served in Bomber Command.
And it's good to hear that you talk a lot about the Governor and what she's done, and that must really make an impact for a lot of the veterans.
Oh, it does. They really. She's assiduous in her care of the veterans community. She goes to all the events, and she understands what it means. And of course, they return the favour. They respect her enormously and are very fond of her.
And as we can see, the Mounted Greys coming along King William Road there, and the band as well.
And the use of the grey horses for the Mounted Police became prominent during World War I, when the Army started procuring darker coloured horses for military service.
That's right. They needed the ones that sort of blended in with the camouflage when they were sent overseas, and so the lighter ones weren't so popular. We sent 136,000 horses overseas for World War I duty, and only one of them returned, and that was Sandy, the mount belonging to General Bridges, who had been killed at Gallipoli.
We all have a fondness for the Mounted Greys in South Australia. You see them clip-clopping through the streets with police at many a time, and it's nice to see them here today.
Yes, they've been with us until I note that they established the South Australian Police Mounted Cadre in 1951, and that's when it became official that they would use greys rather than other colours.
Bill, can you tell us about the saluting as the march progresses down King William Road?
Yeah, well, primarily the saluting points are at the War Memorial on North Terrace. That's an important one. The other one is the saluting dais here where the official party stands, and some of the other units have their own individual saluting points that they acknowledge, but it's all about acknowledging the Governor as I guess you call her our State Commander-in-Chief in a way.
It's nice to see so many young people out here for the march as well, the next generations.
Yes, indeed. It's lovely to see the young ones coming along to express their gratitude for people that have potentially put themselves in harm's way to keep allow those young people to enjoy the way of life they enjoy today. There's the
band of the South Australia Police.
Yep. And before that, the RSL banner. They're being carried by Ray Martin, the former Staff Sergeant with the battalions of the Royal South Australia Regiment.
And there we have the first flyover from the Chipmunks and the Tiger Moths. one of many flyovers that we'll see this morning.
After the band is the flag party, carrying the Navy ensign, the Union flag, the Australian national flag, the Australian red ensign, the New Zealand flag, and the RAAF ensign. Now our New Zealand veterans, and I can see Silver sitting there in the wheelchair. He's been a regular marcher for many, many years, and good to see him.
And the New Zealanders are the guests of honour on Anzac Day. It's good to remember that New Zealand is part of Anzac. We often sometimes forget that.
Yes, they're our guests of honour, and we have an unbreakable bond with that beautiful country. And we invariably, when we go away, in most cases, certainly in Vietnam, we served as a team in a way.
And now we have the Boer War banner passing.
But before that, Turkey, we maintain a marvellous link with the Turkish community in South Australia, and that was spawned by the words of Ataturk in 1934, when he and his country embraced all Australians killed at Gallipoli, bearing in mind we were invading his country, when he said that having died in his country, they'd become our sons as well. And you've got your Boer War banners and the other banners that tell us all about the different conflicts we fought in and the different battles.
And they're carrying those flags in memory of the people who served in those conflicts,
That's
particularly with units of a South Australian connection.
That's right.
And Bill, then of course there's legacy playing a very important role.
They do, led today by legatee and legacy board member Dave Cunningham. Dave's a former legacy ward himself, and the two legacy youth walking with Mr. Cunningham, who will place a wreath at the Cross of Sacrifice at Tyler and Charlotte Lock. Legacy, a club of SA in Broken Hill, currently supports 2,443 beneficiaries and 99 youth. The youngest is 12 months, oldest 110 years. And there are currently 310 legatees that carry that load and provide that important support.
And now we have the World War II veterans.
And there we see, I don't know, the Reg Swanborough with his walker. Dear old Reg is coming up 103. He served, there he is. He served, he's looking good in his original uniform.
Isn't he?
He served in the Royal Navy on the aircraft carrier Vindex. Later he transferred to the RAN, and he served on the Vengeance and the Melbourne. He's irrepressible. I rang him last week and I disturbed him when he had to stop lifting weights at the gym. He said he's so positive and optimistic, said he lifts weight heavier than the bloke's 20 years younger.
Puts the rest of us to shame.
Yes, there we are.
And just like that, we're onto the cruises now.
Yes, then we have. I like to remember Ron George. Ron was a regular marcher, and we miss him dearly. He was, as his family call him, a wonderful, kind, funny, brave and cheeky man, and he used to march here, but has sadly gone last year.
And Bill, we can see that the march is obviously going quite quickly in this portion compared to what it would have been decades ago.
Yes, yes. I think there, I think I can see in the chair Johnny Hooper, 98. He served on the HMAS Westralia. And we go through HMAS Sydney 2. And then after Sydney 2, we've got the Warramunga banner. And Graham West is behind the Warramunga banner, being wheeled by his son Tony, the white Warramunga banner. And his other son, grandson Darian are carrying the banner. Graham's just turned 99, and I'm told his abiding memory is being under Japanese attack, and as a Japanese kamikaze attack, and as the Japanese pilot flew abreast of the Warramunga, Graham saw him wave. The pilot then seemed to alter course, and rather than attack the Warramunga, he attacked the USS Brooks, which was being towed by the Warramunga at the time. So that's...
And there we see the first of our special vehicles who are taking part, who pick up the veterans and allow them to take part in the
Brian
parade.
Ellis is in that Jeep. Brian's recovering from a hip operation and is participating in a vehicle for the first time this year. He enlisted in 1943, aged 17, and will turn 100 on the 26th of May. He was drafted to the Fair Miles and stayed with her to the end of the war. And Fair Miles were nothing more than wooden-hulled motor launchers with two 600 horsepower petrol engines, fitted with nothing more than a 303 machine gun.
And it's so wonderful to have the younger generation watching the march, see these military vehicles and see what it was like in times past.
And now we have the Australian Women's Army Service.
We saw in the chair there being wheeled by her son Warren is Eileen Harding, aged 100. She was born in Springton, and she enlisted in the Australian Women's Army Service and served as a driver. Her duties included driving in convoys in Western Australia. In the vehicle behind, the 58 Searchlight battery vehicle, is Di Watson. Di is the last surviving member of that unit. Pat Rofe was a regular marcher. We remember her. Sadly, we lost Pat last year, and we send our condolences to her daughter. It might have been the year before.
We might have the opportunity to hear more about Di Watson's life a little bit later in the program.
It's a remarkable story.
There were 54,000 South Australians that enlisted in World War II. You know, in the early days, the marches, there were 9,626 were the marched in the first march in 1945, and 120,000 people watched.
It's also important to remember that you mentioned the 35 South Australians enlisted. More than 5,000 of those died.
That's right.
We have the Onkaparinga City Concert Band coming up behind those vehicles.
Interstate units. This is Laurie Gillespie. Laurie Gillespie is Ordnance Corps and a good friend of mine. He saw service in Darwin, Port Moresby, Lay, and rose to the rank of sergeant. Laurie will be 102 in December.
So the Interstate Units Association was formed in 1955 for SA-based ex-servicemen who served in interstate units in Australia and overseas.
I just want to point out the interstate units. Colin Murray was going to march there until late last night, and I got a phone call saying he wouldn't be able to make it. We're thinking of you, Colin. Colin withdrew, and his grandson was marching. Grandson Andrew was marching today with his granddad's medals. Now we're into the Women's Australian Auxiliary Air Force. We see lovely to see Ray Harris and June Hunter there. Irrepressible leading the RAAF contingent. Ray served in signals, intercepting enemy transmissions. June was a driver at Lake Boga Flying Boat Base in Victoria. Both Ray and June are about to celebrate their 99th birthday, and it's just beautiful to see them there with their family.
Worth mentioning that over 27,000 women enlisted.
Yep.
Doing a range of different jobs.
And there we have another vehicle.
Now we've got the Rolls-Royce, and there's a bit of royalty in that. That's
Angus Hughes.
Angus Hughes, thank you, dear Angus. How could I forget? Dear Angus is a Bomber Command veteran, and he is our last former prisoner of war. Angus was a member of 467 Squadron. He flew 32 missions, was shot down on the night of the 26th of September 1944, he endured some terrible hardship before the end of the war, and it's great to see him. He's riding in the stole, which is terribly appropriate.
And the constant we hear this morning is just the round of applause, the audience paying their respects.
Coming up to career veterans, led by John Jarrett. There in the chair. John was the president of the Southeast Asia Forces Association, served in Korea. There he is, between 1953 and 55. I think I skipped over Lyle Ellers. It gets a bit congested at the start of the march. Lyle was marching today with daughter Christine. He was a flight lieutenant and did 2 tours of New Guinea as a Spitfire. First was as a Boomerangs with 4 Squadron, and the second on Kitty Hawks in 78 Squadron.
$18,000 Australians served in the Korean War between 1950 and 53. Great to see.
They have
some
Malaya,
young faces.
Malaya and Borneo veterans led by Vice President Don Cameron with a shock of grey hair there. Warrant Officer Nathan Price is the flag bearer. His father Dennis served in Malaya in the 1960s. Sometimes Aboriginal serviceman John Boxer, oh there he is in the front row with the walker, the grey hair. Marches, John served in Malaya and is a highly respected member of that organisation. We remember our friend, former President Brian Selby, who we lost in 2022. Best also to Paul Rosenweig, who keeps that group together. Really does a good job.
And there we have Royal Australian Navy coming up.
It's wonderful to see that the rain has held off.
We had a
for
few
this.
spots early on, and
It's a little
thankfully it's all
nerve-wracking.
held off for the moment.
That group is the Far East Strategic Reserve, led today by Maury Davey and Secretary Peter Atkins. Best of National Vice President Don Hay, who's at home. The Far East Strategic Reserve was reformed in 1955 and concluded in 1971. 26 RAN ships and 5,000 sailors served in the FESR.
And that wonderful sound behind them is the Adelaide Highland Pipe Band.
Now we have following that pipe band, we have the Royal Australian Navy Vietnam, with starting with the destroyers, known as gunline destroyers. They sailed offshore in Vietnam and provided gunfire support to the troops on the ground. That's Bob Shahinga. Bob's the president of the Vietnam Veterans Association. He served on HMAS Sydney from memory.
And that carried 16,000 troops to Vietnam, the HMAS Sydney.
Nicknamed the Vung Tau Ferry.
Yep. The end of that group is the Royal Australian Navy Clearance Divers. They served in Korea, Malaya, Vietnam, Kuwait, East Timor, Afghanistan and Iraq. And they are an exceptionally courageous group of people. They're called underwater warriors. Their roles include recovery, disposal and demolition of sea mines, but they're also called into work in civilian capacity as well from time to time.
Not a dangerous job at all.
No, not at all.
The SEALs, Americans call them the SEALs.
Yeah, we have an old RAAF vehicle with...
Not sure who's in that vehicle today.
And these military vehicles used in the march are provided by the Military Vehicles Preservation Society of South Australia. And they're housed in the National Military Vehicles Museum at Edinburgh.
Absolutely. It's important to note that all these vehicles that you see are privately owned. And as you said, Richard, they're kept in the Military Vehicle Preservation Society out at Edinburgh. So the drivers of these vehicles will go to the museum this morning, they'll get their vehicle out, they'll prep it, make sure it's in good condition. They'll drive out and pick up the people they have to carry and bring them in here, participate in the march, take them home again, then put their vehicle away, and they do that out of the goodness of their heart. It's a marvellous organisation, very ably led by a fellow called David Carman, but they're great volunteers.
And there we have the Army veterans from Vietnam. And it's important to note that 58 South Australians were killed in action in Vietnam.
Yes, they were. And to this day, they can be proud of their service. Their enemy, the former North Vietnamese and particularly the Viet Cong, regard them, if you go to Vietnam now and you can meet your former enemy, and indeed have dinner with them, and they regard Australians as an honourable enemy, a fair enemy. At the same time, the people we strove to support, the South Vietnamese, who are a vibrant, and we'll see more of them later in this march, vibrant community in South Australia, regard us as a brave and loyal friend. You know, from what I can see, what we did in Vietnam from a military sense was extremely well done, and nothing to be ashamed of over there at all.
And it's amazing that you can still have that connection with a country that you were at war with. Absolutely, and we've still got people going over there supporting orphanages that they supported in 1970. And the same with the Malaya veterans. Veterans are a deep lot. Here's
the Royal Australian Armoured Corps.
Yes. So this is an interesting group. The Armoured Corps consists of armoured personnel carriers and tanks, and there were 3 squadrons of tanks that served, A, B and C, in between 68 and 72, and A Squadron and B Squadron of 3 Cavalry Regiment provided the armoured personnel carriers. It's being led today, that group, by John Viergever from 3 Troop A Squadron, and I've mentioned 3 Troop because they had a reunion here over the last few days. Jeff Townsend was in the front rank there. He served between March 70 and 71 and was wounded in a mine incident.
And Bill, there we see a boomerang flying over.
Coming over.
That's piloted by Jim Wally of Nova Systems.
And cheerio to Craig Mitchell, who is a prominent serviceman and did such a good job in Vietnam. We come straight through to the Royal Australian Artillery, being led by John Derbyshire there. John served with 107 Battery in 1970-71. He went on to become the commanding officer of 16 Air Defence Regiment. I'd like to acknowledge now, as this group goes past, my friend Paul Kopop. Paul died late last year and is very sadly missed by us all. He's former president of the Vietnam Veterans Association. A great man.
And you can hear there the City of Adelaide pipe band as they...
Keeping the pace going.
Royal Australian Engineers coming here, and I can see in that group in the wheelchair is good mate Roger Cook. We've talked about Roger before and the great works he did in Vietnam, being wheeled by his son David. Always remember Terry Zire, who was a great friend of mine who passed away a year or so ago.
And so the engineers were responsible for mine clearing and booby trap disposal.
Another dangerous role.
Yeah, tunnel rats, there they are, a very dangerous role. And they had, I think, a casualty rate of 33%. 1 in 3 was either killed or injured. Cheers to Tony Parmenter, who normally marches. Tony's a cook at a Wirangu man and one of the many Aboriginal men who volunteered for service, even though there was no obligation under the National Service Act for them to do that. Tony's not marching, we send him our best. Royal Australian Corps of Signals, being led today by Keith Bleachmore with the hat on there, celebrating their 100th anniversary. Keith is a Vietnam veteran and then went on after that to serve with the SAS.
A lot of smiles on those faces.
That's right.
Bill, how would you describe the feeling of marching?
It's very personal, but yeah, you get a thrill for being people thanking you. There's Tony Mogridge in the Australian Army training team. Tony there with his green tie on. Very prominent man in the ex-service community, done a lot of good work. We move on to Group 5 with the Army Intelligence Corps. In Vietnam, they collected, collated, evaluated and provided assessments for predictions of enemy deployment based on observations by task force troops.
They've been represented in all major and minor conflicts since being formed on the 6th of December 1907. Now there's the 86th Transport Platoon. They're a good
special one.
And the numbers are really Rudy Bosses there and a few of the other boys breaking formation to wave to us.
And that's who you served with.
Yes, our numbers are down a bit, but they're out there flying the banner for all of us. I'd like to give a shout out to our most senior soldier in many ways, Brigadier Pat Beale from DSOMC, who was with the training team in the Snowchester and Vic Pennington. And also that just went past, but we missed him because those early units closed up together under the civil affairs was a fellow called Bob Hannam. And a lot of people don't understand that as well as fighting a war in Vietnam, the Australians did a huge amount of civil aid. And Bob was an agricultural science graduate who got going a artificial insemination program for pigs, which the villagers in Vietnam thought was fantastic because the small village farm economy really was important to them.
And then
we've got now
the Australian Field Hospital, the unit motive known as the Bat or the Vampire.
And that's Titch Tyson there. Titch is well known in the ex-service community. His son Darren is a prominent veteran himself of Iraq and Afghanistan, have done a great job in his military service. So there's at least 2 generations there.
And they were known as the Bat or Vampire because of their call for blood donations.
That's exactly right.
That's right. Providing surgical and medical services.
That's right.
With a 99% success rate for patients who actually reach them.
Yes, that's a marvellous record, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
8-field ambulance there, that's important. On the right-hand side with the walkers, Bob Atkinson. Rob was a trauma and orthopaedic surgeon who served in Vietnam, Rwanda, Bougainville, Gulf War 1 and East Timor. In his spare time, he went up and did civil aid in Banda Aceh and Samoa. Good on you, Rob. It's good of you to make. I know hard work for Rob to get out today, but it's fantastic. With the coloured tie there on the left-hand side is Rod Murray. He's on he's on the board of the RSL and does a great job. He served, I think, as a radiographer in Vietnam, if my memory serves me correctly.
I think it's great to see as many veterans as possible who are turning out for the march. We just saw a gentleman there who was on crutches. It's such a great experience to see.
There's Dean Ryan in the back of the bus waving to us. I just talk about these buses. This is fantastic. The RSL care buses. And upon these 3 buses we see now, the RSL care bus comes from the War Veteran Home at Myrtlebank and the other buses from Moreland Court at Angle Park. These vehicles carry a varied and proud group of veterans, and it's sad we can't see them. They represent the 3 services with operational service in World War II, Vietnam and Afghanistan. They served in, the people on these buses served in the ADF, the British Army, the American Army, the Cypriot Army, and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. And among them, Wilf Taylor, 102. He was a signaller who saw active service in New Guinea and Borneo, and he went to the notorious Sandakan POW camp where he saw the suffering of the Australian soldiers. Also got World War II Army veteran Jeff Walsh, aged 102, and Fred Lockwood, who served in the RAN in the Southwest Pacific. Also aboard is Val Lawrence, and Val was a nursing officer with the RAAF who participated in Operation Baby Lift, which involved the mass evacuation of children in the last days of the Vietnam War.
And now we're on to Group 6, Vietnam and Southeast Asia veterans, led by the Vietnam Veterans Organisations.
Yep, they're all there.
A couple of groups there joining together in solidarity.
Absolutely. Phil Scroop was leading that group. Citizen Military Force Observers, I can know one of those men, Jeff Laurie. They went across to Vietnam as Army Reserve observers.
And there we have the Air Force Association. The RAAF began its involvement in the Vietnam War in 1964.
That's the President, Group Cap Lawrence NG, and following him is Group Captain Robert Black with the white hat there, straw hat. Robert's a veteran of Rwanda, Bougainville and East Timor, and both he and Lawrence remain tireless contributors to the ex-service community.
Also playing a significant role in humanitarian efforts in the final days of the Vietnam War.
Following that is RAAF Vietnam, led by Norm Goodall, DFC. You would have seen him, there he is, seen him in the paper a couple of days ago. I should take time to mention our good friend, while I've got a second, Colin Wagoner. Colin Wagoner's 107, a dearest man. I've mentioned him each year. He lives in the hills, amazingly fit and alert and well cared for by his son Paul. He served between 39 and 45 in the Signals Detachment of the 2nd 3rd Anti-Aircraft Regiment and saw overseas service in Mauritania, North Borneo. But I want to tell you this story. I rang him yesterday and he said, "Bill, did you see the paper the day before?" And I said, I didn't, Colin. He said, "I was on the front page." He said, "I knocked the paper off the front page." He said, "That's not a bad effort. Do you think I'll be excommunicated?" And I said, "After 107 years, I reckon they know what sort of bloke you are, Colin. You don't have to worry about it too much."
Having that sort of sense of humour at 107
Exactly.
years, what an amazing man. And we're going to hear from Colin a little bit later in the program. We sat down and spoke to him about his story. And now
The
we have
HMA submarines, Australian Oberon-class submarines, conducting surveillance missions and covert operations.
Yep. And we've got the Australian Entertainment. Oh, there's Lyle. Oh, good old Lyle Ellis has managed to sneak in, and we talked about Lyle before. Good to see you, Lyle.
And we will have more of Lyle's story later in the program again.
We have the entertainment groups there. You can see Johnny Mack on the left and Bev Harrell. They entertain the troops. I know Ann Wills was one of these too at one stage.
and really playing an important role to sort of keep people's spirits up.
Raising morale. Now we have our South Vietnamese veterans being led by Dang Thao Nguyen. Thao served for 6 years in the Republic of Vietnam Air Force. Lung Tran is there, and he served on the DMZ. In 5 days, there's Nguyen Van Tay in the middle there. I call him Admiral. He was in the Navy, the South Vietnamese Navy. In 5 days, on the 30th of April, this community will commemorate probably the most significant event, certainly in the last 50 years, but it's the anniversary of the fall of Saigon and the loss of their country. So while we Australians left Vietnam in 1973 and came back to safety and security of Australia, these men and women fought on for a couple more years. Then they lost their country. Then they had to get on leaky boats and come and make a new life. A hugely different challenge for them, and we respect them for them. We respect them for that.
And we're on to Group 7 now. Royal Australian Regiment, Special Air Service Regiment and Commandos. And the President's Party is being led by Rodney Graham.
There's Rod. 1 RAR follows, led by John Genovese, and 1 RAR was the first battalion to go to Vietnam.
Now we're seeing some people there, Bill, with medals on both sides. Can you explain what's happening there?
Yes, the medals you're awarded to are on the left-hand side, and the others are on your right-hand side. The ones that are maybe belong to an ancestor that you're remembering are on your right-hand side. Just point out, there's 2 RAR. That's important. That's John Mathwin keeping the pace. But the man in the chair is. Front rank is Patrick Forbes, MC. Now, Patrick was awarded the Military Cross. This is quite special for his service in Korea in '53 at the Battle of the Samashon River. But he's accompanied today by his 2 sons, Jonathan and Richard. Jonathan's wearing the Military Cross awarded to Patrick's brother, Jim, who was a prominent federal politician. Jim was awarded his Military Cross for service in Bougainville, and there Patrick's other son, Richard's wearing his grandfather Alexander's medals. Alexander served at Gallipoli and got his MC for service in Pozieres. So there you have it, something unique, probably in Australia. 3 Military Crosses awarded in 3 conflicts to 2 generations of the same family.
And then we move on to the 4th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment there, and behind them the 5th Battalion with that distinctive tiger's head on the banner.
And the 5th RAR contingent is being led by Ron Gaskin, who served in Vietnam with 5 RAR in 1969 to 1970.
Remember Peter Scott, who was the CO of 3 RAR, a marvellous man who died only a week or so ago. Korea veteran as a platoon, as a young officer, and then came back to command the 3RAR in Vietnam, and did a great job for the ex-service community. Also Graham Spinkston from 4RAR, great South Australian, who we lost sadly a year or two ago. Only a few weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. He was wounded at the Battle of Neuilly. Get to 8RAR. Not too many from 8RAR are here because of it was raised in another state, so didn't see service in South Australia. 6RAR went past, and Mick Storen was there in the front rank on the right-hand side. Mick, as many know, is the subject of the song I Was Only 19, written by his brother-in-law. That unit was being led by Lee Floyd. Both Mick and Lee were injured in mine incidents in Vietnam.
And this is the 9th Battalion here, and it's being led by Jeff Betcher. Jeff was a machine gunner in Vietnam in 1968-69. And the flags they're holding represent the deceased members of the team.
Indeed. Jeff went on, and when he left later in life, he became a yachtsman, and I think owned a secret men's business and won the Sydney Hobart. We remember Terry Slattery was a member of 3RAR, sorry, of 9RAR. Terry passed away in 2014, but he continues to make a massive contribution to our march, because his company, Signs Incorporated, generously provide all the signs for this march, which is great. Cheerio to Warren Featherby and Jim Fisher. Doug Strain leading 2nd 4th Battalion there, which he was in that battalion in the mid-1980s. The captain, 57RAR.
Bill, it's saying that a lot of these battalions are linked. Can you explain what that means?
Well, it's just basically a situation where units might, for various strategic reasons, they might decide to combine units because of their, they have a similar role, and it might be just a government decision. It could, in fact, be a situation where looking to descale organisations, and they bring them down and combine for like 5 battalion, 7 battalion, and then they realise later on they want to expand them again, and they break into their own individual organisations. So it's a difficult thing.
And now we're on to the recent conflicts and peacekeepers. We can see people who served in Kuwait. 1,800 ADF members from all 3 services were deployed to Kuwait in response to Iraq's August 1990 invasion.
Known as Desert Storm.
Guy Bowring served with the RAAF in Kuwait, and remember him fondly. Then move on to Somalia after Kuwait. There's John O'Grady. He served in Somalia. I mentioned John last year, but he's had 51 years in uniform. Got the blue beret out the front.
And these are the peacekeepers and multinational force and observers.
Led by Brigadier Graham Goodwin. Many would know him because he's had a significant career in the ADF and the South Australian Police, including deployments to East Timor, there he is at the bottom of the screen, and Afghanistan, as well as serving in domestic operations in response to bushfires and COVID-19.
The City of Onkaparinga Pipe Band following there.
Yeah, we have the group from Afghanistan. More than 20,000 Australian military personnel served over a 13-year period in Afghanistan. 41 Australian soldiers were killed and 362 wounded.
4 Victoria Crosses for Australia awarded.
Yes, very much the new generation, the younger generation, the most recent of our conflicts. Hopefully they'll carry on. They carry the banner, and the older World War II fellows are gone, and the Vietnam veterans are already starting to fade out a little bit.
Bill, an extraordinary effort to coordinate all these different groups. What makes South Australia unique in how we organise the Anzac Day March?
I think it's probably because the RSL have retained a tight control of it. In the other states, I know they've allowed it to be run by a range of organisations, and I don't think it has the purity that South Australia has, because the RSL is the guardian of the commemorative conscience of South Australia, and it's generally fueled by, manned by servicemen and women that have served, and consequently they have a good, strong feeling for what's required, and you know, I think it is regarded nationally as the best march of its sort.
We are already into Group 9, recent conflicts and peacekeepers.
We saw the Solomon Islands there, and also border protection operations.
I think a wide range of activities that our servicemen and women are called upon to do.
And Army reservists as well, deployed
Absolutely.
on many of those operations.
And you see that blue flag there, that's the police peacekeepers. The grouping includes civilian police from all states in Australia, including federal police and others who have served with UN peacekeeping forces.
Humanitarian operations.
Followed by the Defence Civilians with operational service. Over 219 members of the Defence Science and Technology Organisation at Edinburgh have completed deployments in support of our ADF in operational areas including East Timor, Timor-Leste, Solomon Islands and Afghanistan.
And then Group 10 is returned and non-returned former and serving personnel.
Led by, that's the National Servicemen's Association, led by the Padre.
So this is those drafted.
Yes, in a sense, there were two schemes, and one 51 to 59, where all 18-year-old men were conscripted, served for 3 months full-time basic training in Navy, Army and Air Force, and then there was the second group, 65 to 72, they're 20-year-old men liable for selective service from a birthday date ballot, and those selected were conscripted for 2 years full-time service with the Australian Regular Army, and they were the ones that supplemented the regular forces in Vietnam.
There were 300,000 men conscripted between 1951 and 1972.
Yeah, huge number.
202 paying the ultimate sacrifice for their service, including 58 from South Australia.
We've got the Australian Defence Health Services, Vicky Anderson's AM, leading that. And when she did deploy, she was the first female CO to deploy with the unit overseas since World War II. Women's Royal Australian Navy Service.
And that's the Mitcham City Brass Band.
A change from the pipes we've been hearing a lot of this morning.
Former members of the Royal Australian Navy.
Former members of the HMAS Adelaide.
Members representing crews from both the HMAS Adelaide 1 and HMAS Adelaide 2.
HMAS Encounter. It's a shore base. Most South Australians would have heard about it. The shore base at the Port Adelaide Division of the Royal Australian Navy Reserve. was HMAS Torrens originally, then became HMAS Encounter in 1965. The base was closed in 1994 and the Navy Support Office established at Keswick, but they recommissioned it in 2024. You can't keep a 2022. You can't keep a good organisation down.
Certainly not.
This is Tingara, HMAS Lewin. Tingara is an Aboriginal word for open sea, and this includes any members of the RAN who served under the name Tingara during training at any stage of their career. The training basis for these young men were HMAS Tingara, HMAS Lewin and HMAS Cerberus.
Sorry, Bill.
No, the Tingara was it was a combination steam sailing ship built in 1866 in Scotland and was commissioned in Australia in 1912.
And then coming up behind them again are the military transport vehicles, such an important role looking after our veterans who can't make the long walk alone.
Absolutely.
Now we're on to Group 11, returned and non-returned former and serving personnel, led by the Australian Army former members.
Yes, there they are.
Including all former members of the Australian Army not marching in other units.
That's right. Members of the Women's Royal Australian Navy Service, the RANS.
In the dark green.
Oh, there we go.
Blazers.
Yeah, Women's Royal Australian Army Corps there. That's Cheryl Cates. Cheryl was the president of the RSL here in South Australia until a couple of years ago. Did a great job.
Known as RAC.
Right.
In this group, filled with duties as clerks and drivers, signals operators.
It's often forgotten how much of a role women played during all the wars.
Absolutely. And the Women of Royal Australian Army Corps were terribly valuable to all of us. Cheryl's married to our Army officer Peter Cates, so the two of them together make a major contribution to the ex-service community. This is the officer training unit at Skyville. This was, if 2 years as a national serviceman wasn't bad enough, if you were selected, you could undergo 154 days intense training to turn them into young officers. So of your 730 days, 154 was spent in an intense course, so that after you finished that 154 days, you could go almost straight to Vietnam and be a platoon commander and command 30 men or a troop of armoured personnel carriers on the field of battle. It says a lot about the character of the men, and it says a lot about the training regime of the Army. It still continues, it still astounds me. 328 graduates from the officer training unit served in Vietnam. Many were decorated and sadly 8 were killed.
9 were military cross recipients.
Yep. Bob Lewis and John O'Connell, 2 mates of mine, did a great job. I think they were both wounded in Vietnam.
Air Defence Artillery there.
Yep.
And they provide protection to military assets from Army units in the field, to a defensive role to the Royal Australian Navy, and air defence to the Royal Australian Air Force.
The engineers. The engineers have a history that goes back to before Gallipoli. Once a sapper, always a sapper. Well, we've got a survey corps. These men used to provide survey data for the compilation and production of military maps.
You wouldn't use that many maps anymore?
They don't use them anymore. So they still march. They did a good job.
The Royal Australian Corps of Signals had its 100th anniversary of formation this year.
It did, and they're very proud of that.
Absolutely.
consists of both reservists and regular Army members, and they were responsible for field communications, electronic command and control, and electronic warfare. This corps is represented in Adelaide by 1446 Squadron.
You can see the Royal South Australian Regiment representing members from National Service, CMF, Reserves and regular Army who have served with the 10th, 27th Battalion RSR and many of its units.
We especially remember Rod Beams, the late president of the RSAR Association, who passed away in September last year. He was a great servant of the association and its relation with the regiment. They've also asked me to mention Jim Thompson. Jim served for many years with 10 and 27 and 1027 Battalion RSAR and the Adelaide University Regiment, fondly remembered by the members of that unit, those units.
Bill, you must keep a special book of mentions, of names to mention.
Yes, you try and under important events, particularly when you can't get them all ever, but you know, when people that have marched for many years and we know of them, and that's the first challenge, pass away. If you get an opportunity, but as you can see, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But you know, they're missed, their service is acknowledged. Here's a flyover of Poseidon, I think.
That looks like Poseidon.
That's...
Yeah.
And
All
we're up to
eyes
Group
looking
12.
From 92 wing.
Returned and non-returned, former and serving personnel.
Yep. See Blue Wanaka, Rob Kenny and Beryl Rowe there in that unit. These are. We also remember Linda Mole and Dale Woodhart, who are regular marchers, very highly regarded, and sadly passed away.
Bill, what are some of the biggest changes you've noticed in the march over the past, say, 5 years?
I think it's still an issue of Jessica of numbers. You know, numbers just dwindling. Probably the biggest one would be in World War II. And as we said all those years ago, March 9,626. But in the last few years in the in the World War II section, down to 100 and then 50, and as you saw today, probably 10 or 15.
Here's an important group. We've got the Army Catering Corps and also the Pay Corps.
linked together, Army marches on his stomach.
Food and pay.
One thing you don't do is neglect to pay the soldiers. So mail and pay and food are all very, very important.
So, Bill, sometimes there are banners without anyone behind them. What does that mean going forward?
Well, you never know whether somebody's going to march next year, Jessica, so you're very careful about taking a banner away. But generally speaking, if we know the members have passed away, the banner gets one extra year to be acknowledged. The unit gets acknowledged and then it gets retired. But it doesn't leave the tapestry of the march. It just moves to a different part of the march where people can, the next of kin can march. Effectively, particularly the World War II units. If those units have disappeared, it means there's no one left to march. But the family might want to march still, so they march, but a slightly different part of the proceedings. Cheers to Alan Mohammed, who's a former member of the Pay Corps and a great man, not well at the moment. We send you our best, Alan.
HMAS Encounter.
And then the Merchant Navy there. Well, now we've got the Australian Defence Force, yes. HMAS Encounter. Leading the Navy Guard is Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander Samantha Fuss.
So this is really starting to show us
Australian Defence Force.
What the numbers would have looked like at the march many years ago.
And also those years ago they were 8 or 9 abreast. See, they've been reduced to 3.
So 3 across
now,
this time.
That still seems lengthy, but they were, the whole of that lane of the road was filled with returned servicemen and women 30, 40 years ago.
leading the Navy Guard is the Executive Officer of HMAS Encounter, Lieutenant Commander Samantha Fuss. HMAS Encounter includes the Naval Construction Branch, which supports the naval shipbuilding at Osborne, the Royal Australian Navy Band, and is the parent unit for Navy personnel posted to a number of joint units in SA.
And behind them is the Australian Army Guard, the 10th Brigade headquarters, based at Edinburgh Base.
Commanded by Brigadier Nicholas Wilson, along with RSM Warrant Officer Class 1 Anthony Portler. I know Anthony. 9 Regiment.
That's 9 Regiment.
It really is a reminder of just how many people are still serving.
9 Regiment holds the Army Reserve mortar-equipped light batteries located across Australia. One of those is 613 battery, which has mortar troops in South Australia and Tasmania.
Now I noticed they've got a white coming down lanyard. What does that signify?
That signifies the branch of the Army.
Okay.
The Jurien, and white is artillery.
Bill,
As is the colour patch on the puggaree. Puggaree is the band around the slouch hat. You can see in that case is blue and red. That signifies artillery.
could you tell us a bit more about some of the hat differences? What they represent?
I guess it all comes back in some, not in all cases, but in many cases, the different sorts of headwear is to do with where people serve. Sometimes berets for people that are in RAMI or transport or things like that. Berets are a much more practical form of headdress. The traditional headdress for the Australian soldier is a slouch hat, khaki hat, fur felt, and that's also a ceremonial dress. But in the bush they wear, we call them in Vietnam a giggle hat. It's more like a cloth hat. So fortunately, headdress is designed around the type of job people have to do.
Doing a good job there is the Australian Army Band.
This is 1446 Squadron, led by Commanding Officer Major Chris Berzer and the RSM Warrant Officer Class 2 Bill Peterson.
It's also a good opportunity to acknowledge the current deployments that are underway around the world. Operation Beach in the Hamas-Israel conflict, as well as Operation Fortitude in Syria. Not to mention the, incredibly important role that our forces play in natural disasters and helping out in those recovery situations. Most recently, of course, with the cyclone in southeast Queensland.
There were more than 1,200 ADF personnel who were helping out after ex-tropical cyclone Alfred hit southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, joining emergency services to do everything from sandbags, conducting welfare checks.
You've got the City of Adelaide squadron there with, I think they're security dogs. Everybody loves the dogs.
Oh, yeah.
Leading the squadron is Commanding Officer Wing Commander Craig Keane, along with Squadron Warrant Officer Brian Merrick. 24 Squadron is the only RAAF unit granted the freedom of the City of Adelaide. They got that in May 79.
And a large contingent now from the RAAF Edinburgh, home to many RAAF units. There's really a lot of people who are based at the RAAF base at Edinburgh. Its main tenant is 92 Wing, which through number 11 Squadron operates the new P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. I saw a Poseidon fly over only a few moments ago.
Absolutely.
We have the Royal Navy. This is the longest associated force in Australian history, dating back to Sydney Cove in 1788.
Cheerio to the family of Captain Bill Richardson. Bill, long-time Macclesfield resident, 100 years old. Bill was all set to march today, and sadly we were looking forward to having him. He was going to be behind the British Army area there, and sadly we lost him a couple of days ago on Wednesday. So we send our condolences to his family.
Must be hard every year because there's always someone who's lost before Anzac Day.
Well, this year we've had 4 in the last, the last week. It's tragic. You've got to expect it, I suppose, because all our World War... The youngest one is Brian Ellis, who went through earlier on. He had his hip operation. He's 99. The oldest in South Australia, is dear Colin Wagner, who's going 1,000,000 miles an hour at 107. But, I think everybody understands how vulnerable that age group is.
We just had the British Airborne Forces.
And that's the City of Elizabeth Pipe Band and the Mount Barker Caledonian Society Pipes and Drums. It's great to see so many community bands also taking part in the Anzac Day March.
They're the lifeblood in a way, Richard. They come out each year. In the early days when the march was longer, they'd actually do it twice. They'd finish and then they'd somehow get themselves back up to the start of the march again, and they'd march a second time. So that was... I'd like, while we've got a bit of a break, just to mention a really good mate called Ray Hardigan, and he'd be very well known in the Riverland, Ray Hardigan OAM. He's made an exceptional contribution to his nation as a soldier, and afterwards he followed his father into service, had a similarly distinguished career, becoming an RSM before accepting a commission. Then he did great work with the St Vincent de Paul Society, and I think he was credited with creating the name Vinnie's for St Vincent de Paul, helping commercialise that organisation. So best to you, Ray, and love to Bev.
Bill, as you mentioned, we do have a slight break in the march, but I mean, we have such a large and marvellous march here in Adelaide, but what would be happening around other parts of South Australia today?
Well, some of them would have their own little marches, but probably the thing that's consistent around the nation, certainly in South Australia, are the commemorative services in the morning. So little rural outlets and little communities may not even have any servicemen, so the march is not relevant for them, but nearly all of them will have a war memorial and a memorial hall, and they'll gather there, and they will have their own little ceremonies. Some of them are formal, some of them are less formal, some of them have a large number, some of them only a few. I know today there was one at Tooparang this morning down on the Flurio. They had a marvellous service this morning. I'm told it was attended by over 100 folk. They followed the normal order of service in a very solemn atmosphere, rendered by people who hadn't seen service. So this was a community contribution. I'm told this morning was particularly poignant because the Kookaburras joined the chorus just as dawn broke, which would have been beautiful, and then afterwards they followed the tradition of a gunfire breakfast, which involves rum in your coffee. I don't know whether they all do that, but they were doing it down here at Torrens earlier today. But Tooparang do a wonderful job maintaining the tradition and acknowledging Anzac in that little area. And if you look at Australia as being a patchwork of communities, then Anzac is remembered around the nation. Anyway, with Tooparang, great work, Milton Banks and your mates. I've always seen, I think the RSL sees the Anzac tradition as a currency of sorts that just everybody in Australia seems to acknowledge it and respect it, and it can do good things. It's marvellous that people with no direct link to conflict or service can embrace it and support it. Having said that, as I pointed out previously, every family, if you scratch hard enough, you'll find a relation. I guess you two might have relations that served, but pretty well all of us.
Really binding communities as well as generations.
It does.
But it's also evident in you seeing people lining the streets, turning out for the parade. We also had a lot of people turn up this morning at the National War Memorial for the Anzac service, and it's really part of a trilogy of commemorations on the day. We have the service, the dawn service, which is sort of seen as the funeral service. The march that we've been watching live this morning signifies the march to the burial site. And after the march, we'll go to the Cross of Sacrifice, which symbolises the burial.
Exactly.
And so what happens after all the commemorations happen on Anzac Day? Is it a time for celebration then, to get together with mates? And
Yes, particularly the younger ones. I know that early on, when young fellas just come back from Vietnam, they used to start at a hotel at about 5 in the morning and would still be going at 10 at night. But those days are long gone. Yes, there are reunions. The units will get together. Families will join in. I think it's become a little bit more of a family day. That's what the younger generation prefer, and the older generation are getting too old to follow the ways they did earlier on. This is our Greek guard, I think, that's coming through.
yeah, the Greek Presidential Guard.
The Greek Presidential Guard called the Evzones. Is that?
You're watching Anzac Day commemorations live and exclusive on ABC TV and ABC iView. Joining me in the commentary team is RSL SA Ambassador Bill Denny and my ABC colleague Richard Davies. I'm Jessica Harmson, and we are just seeing the end here of Group 14.
We'll now move, after the Greek Presidential Guard makes its way past, we'll get to the Group 15 as descendants. From
Well, there we actually have Poland, a special link between Polish veterans and Australians. The Free Polish Army units were part of the British force that relieved the 9th Australian Division at the Siege of Tobruk in the Middle East during 1941.
Maintained a very good link right through to they all passed away. Greek, that's right. Veterans of the underground resistance struggle during Germany's occupation of Poland also march.
There we have a couple more vehicles, the British Airborne Forces and the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers.
Tony Sikowski used to march in the Polish group. He had the distinction of being taken prisoner of war, and when I asked him about this, he said twice. And I said, really? So he was captured by the Germans and escaped, and then was captured again. The Polish government eventually awarded a medal to the Rats of Tobruk that survived.
And there we see one of the first descendants marching with a photograph of their loved one. And this is really a time that the descendants and the relatives can now come out and pay tribute to those who have served.
They have a marvellous role to play, the descendants, particularly ones that 2nd 43rd Battalion is one organisation, but there are many others that where the next of kin and the family of members of a unit have clubbed together. The members of the unit might have died, passed on, but the families still stick together. I'll be going to a luncheon today for the families of the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion. These are the dear men that many of whom were prisoners of war. Chuck Fowler and Jack Thomas were the last two former prisoners of war of the Japanese here in South Australia, and their families keep the tradition going, and we remember them, particularly Jack and Chuck and Lou and Ron and Louis, those that served there.
And of course 2025 sees a number of major anniversaries this year. 110th anniversary of the landing of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps at Gallipoli, and the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II with VE Day on the 8th of May 1945 and VJ Day on the 15th of August 1945. Now, Bill, as the descendants move through, I know we touched on this earlier, but their medals are worn differently. What we're going to see is the medals worn on the right.
That's right. That's exactly
so
right.
So now we're going to
Jessica.
see this group have...
That's right. It's spot on. That's how it changes. It sort of turns a page of a book. At the beginning of the march, you've got the medals on the left, and at the latter part of the march, certainly in this group, unless a person served themselves, they wear medals on the right. And you can see that gentleman, the green medal, is the Defence Medal of World War II. The lady there is wearing World War I medals.
And what we're seeing is a replication of what we saw at the start, isn't it? We start with the earlier conflicts and then move on to the more recent day.
Yes, I think that group were marching behind the Boer War sign. So they would have had their ancestors, loved ones, served in World War in the Boer War, in this case World War I.
And it is touching. It is touching to see them also carrying photographs, keeping the memory alive of those people who did serve.
Bill, why don't they all march together?
I think there's the issue of recognition and the recognition of brand loyalty, if I can use that word. I like to be identified with who they served with. It's like Jessica calling all football and throwing them all on the one oval, but we know that football has a whole range of codes, and each one of them is very loyal to its own brand. So it's a similar thing.
Absolutely.
So you can see those medals are World War I medals. The red, white and blue one on the left, as you look at it, it means the 14-15 star, means the person who was awarded that medal joined up pretty well straight away at the start of World War I, and they got a special medal for offering their service really quickly after the conflict commenced.
And that's the Seymour College pipe band you can see on screen right now.
I'd like to mention a few World War II veterans who were very regular marchers over the years. And this is not a comprehensive list, but these are people that did march regularly and now they've gone. And the people in this group behind here could well be remembering these men and women. They may not. But we remember Harold Wills and David Mattingly, Bill Corey, Tony Sikowski, Bill Madigan, Clary Baker, Thelma Zimmerman and Brian Fennell, John Barnett, Harrison Selleck, Lloyd Wiggins, Clary Baker, Bill Madigan, Joe Groves, Sid I, Bill Schmidt, and Bob Masterson and dear Bob Bungie.
And I just wanted to mention, we just saw the Royal Australian Navy passing there, and I wanted to shout out to Brenton Honour, who's marching with his children for his grandfather Charles Honour, who was killed when the Sydney went down in 1941.
With all hands, over 600 people as I recollect. So all these units, these banners would have been in the beginning of the march not too many years ago, and they would have had men marching and women marching behind them in some cases, but because no one survives, they are now marching here, and the people marching behind the banners are next of kin, and they carry, in some cases, pictures of their lost loved one, and we as a nation acknowledge the service of their ancestor.
And in the years to come, we will see the start of the Anzac Day March probably thin out a little bit, and the back of the march with the descendants to be the area that's growing.
That's right. It's what is happening now in other states. And you talked about our march, and I'm pretty proud of it, having been involved for 30 years. In the other states, they allowed all the next of kin and the service people, servicemen and women, to march together. But what we found is, as the World War II men and women were passing on and the numbers were becoming smaller, it became a Where's Wally type competition to work out which was the veteran and which was a family member. So we made the tough decision. Oh, it wasn't tough, and now it's been well accepted here in South Australia, to ask the next of kin to participate in this part of the march and leave the early part of the march to those that actually served. And we thank the community for embracing that, the other states didn't do that, and they still have a situation now where the one veteran who might be surviving in a unit can be surrounded by 20, 30, 40 family members, and you know, very hard to give him or her that acknowledgement that they deserve.
But it is still nice that the relatives, the families can still take part, especially young men like that.
It's imperative, it's crucial, because if they're blocked out in any way, then we're going to lose the tradition and the value and the importance we place on Anzac. So, you know, and as I said, it's a currency that belongs to every single Australian. We can all spend it in some way. I found it valuable in the issue of reconciliation. The Aboriginal community for many years regarded Anzac as a party to which they were never invited. But a lot of work's been done on that, and we found that there are Anzacs, there are Aboriginal people of the Boer War, World War I. And when you tell them that, their whole families get innovated. They just are so thrilled to know that they were part of what was so big in Australia, and the non-Aboriginal community are likewise impressed to see that the Aboriginal people are involved. So Anzac then has become part of the reconciliation process. It's become a currency spent by the two cultures.
It's interesting that you mentioned that sometimes people don't want to march. They don't feel like they have a place in the march. Why is that?
A lot of Australians are like that. I know the younger veterans that you'll see them, you know, sometimes standing on street corners in their black suits, and they come to watch, but they don't know. You ask them, and I know there's a very prominent female service woman here in Australia. South Australia. I won't mention the name. She'd be embarrassed, but I know her well, and she said to me the other day she didn't feel like marching, and she's been overseas. She was in Iraq. She didn't want to march because she just doesn't feel comfortable with that veteran tag yet, you know, which is, so it's a personal thing. Hopefully the younger ones, the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, will become to embrace the mantle as life goes on, time goes on.
So these are the descendants of Allied nations, cadet forces, marshals. And you can really see the next generation in this particular group coming through. Really the march being a place for all.
And just a reminder that after our commemorations here in Adelaide come to an end, we're going to take you live to Gallipoli for the dawn service there, followed by Anzac Day at Villers-Bretonneux in France.
Special hello to Dudley Roberts now, but Dudley's the last known member of the 2nd 27 Battalion, a very famous South Australian battalion. Dudley's watching from Kangaroo Island. Dudley, I hope you're still listening. He's also thought to be the last surviving soldier settler on Kangaroo Island, and he enlisted in Port Pirie and is now 101. He served in Balikpapan and in New Guinea, and thanks to daughter Sandra for telling us about Dudley, because for some years now the 2nd 27th Battalion Association thought that all their members had passed on. Dudley was over the sea gap on KI.
And there we have the group from South Vietnam.
The family, the families, yep.
Yep.
There's
a real cultural representation there.
It does. They're becoming bigger. There's Quinn Tran in the striking white our dye with the poppy on it. Quinn Tran's I think she was one stage the president of the South Vietnamese Association here in South Australia. But they've got a very vibrant community, and now of course it's coming up in only 5 days. As I said, they will be remembering the loss of their nation, and you know, it's hard for us. As I said, I came back after a 13-14 month service and tried to slot back into life in Australia, but these people had been fighting for many years and fought on until 1975. All their families were involved, not just the fathers but the mothers and the children. they could be involved in the fighting, you know, if it went that way into a village. Then the challenge, then they went into re-education camps and then eventually came home.
And now we have the Australian Navy cadets that play a very important role in the Anzac Day March. Carrying the banners, the identification plates.
Yes, they do. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. There's a huge number of people that get involved in this march, but the cadet corps of the Navy, Army and Air Force are extremely valuable.
And the naval cadets include young men and women aged between 13 and 19.
I think we're getting up towards, after the cadets that have done such a sterling job. The cadets are open to boys and girls between 13 and 18, so this is I think what you see here is also a bit of a PR exercise, and why wouldn't you want to be involved?
And there are some 23 Army Cadet units in South Australia and Broken Hill with 600 members.
A long history in Australia going all the way back to 1909.
We're going to have the Enfield Brass Band and the Harndorf Tamba Town Band, but I'd like to, at this point, the marshals are about to come up, and there are 120 marshals and about 1,400 volunteers make sure this march gets off the ground and is run well. But a special acknowledgement to Chair of the Anzac Day Committee, Ian Smith. I'll point him out in a minute. There he is. At the conclusion of today's activities, Ian will retire after 10 years of quite exceptional service, and we regard Ian as the guardian of the commemorative conscience of our state, and he and the committee organise and manage almost every aspect of Anzac Day, including the march, but not just the march. The dawn service, the cross of sacrifice ceremony. As I said, we're proud to have what we think is the best march in the nation. The RSL regards our march as a gift to the people of South Australia, and it's a gift that's 12 months in the preparation. Ian's also a published author. He's written For Love of Country, the first book to record the service to our nation of Aboriginal veterans of South Australia and the Boer War, from the Boer War to the current day. Well done, Ian, for what you've done over 10 years and in so many areas. We're exceptionally grateful to you, mate, and we'll know you'll go on and do. You won't be lost to the service community, ex-service community. You'll just go on and do bigger and better things.
Hear, hear. And that is finishing up there with the Barossa Light Horse Historical Association. And that concludes the Anzac Day March here in Adelaide. We'll go to the Cross of Sacrifice at Pennington Gardens shortly. But first, let's hear more about one of our veterans. Colin Wagner celebrated his 107th birthday in December last year. He joined the militia in 1938 before World War II and worked in signals intelligence. Colin had postings in Loveday, Bonegilla and Townsville, and in 1945 Colin earned the right to command his own unit. They were sent to Labuan Island, Borneo.
Yes, I joined up with 4 friends, and one was killed in the Middle East, the other one died as a POW. I don't know what happened to the next one, but the last one was Steve Tillett. He was shot in New Guinea, so I was the lucky one. I was at Loveday working the link from Adelaide to Darwin, and they said we could have 4 hours leave. So I went and got my future wife, and I said, I've got 4 hours leave. And she said, we go in the register office and get married. She said, yes. So we went to the register office and got married, and we got back, and I think from about 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock I had leave. And in that time I got married and got back to camp. And they gave me the AIF unit to go overseas. And we went from Brisbane to Morotai, which is a little island the Americans had taken. And we were there for a while, and we saw ships coming in, LSTs, landing ship tanks. That's the ones with the doors at the front. And we thought they've got to be for us. We've got to do a landing somewhere. There was high secrecy where we were going, we weren't told, but it turned out to be Labuan and Borneo. I took some photos of it. I had a camera with me all the way through. And the Japanese headquarters were about 200 or 300 miles south. That's where the General Baba was. He was in charge. And a message was sent by radio to them to come down to out to Labuan in the morning at 10 o'clock and sign the surrender document. And they would paint a white cross on the aeroplane over the red flags, the Japanese flags, so that we'd know who it was. That's the official reason. But the unofficial reason was to humiliate the Japanese, to paint over their flags. I was there by the airstrip and flew overhead. General Barber was there. He was responsible for the death marches at Sandakan. And he got out of the plane and he was told to get into a Jeep. He walked over to the Jeep and he got in it, and naturally being a general, he sat in the front seat. But the private had other ideas. He said the general would get in the back. And I just happened to be with the camera and photographed the general sitting in the back seat of the Jeep to prove that that really happened. And the private sat in the front seat. I spoke to the Jeep driver afterwards, and he said he took him as fast as he could over every bump he could. The official version was there was a hut that they used for headquarters, and there's 2 official photographs showing him getting out of the Jeep and showing him walking to the hut and signing the surrender document. That's it. But that was not it. What the general did not know was that they parked a water gun, which is a very loud noise. They parked it hard up against the hut. And they made sure the general didn't see it when he came in. And the general walked in, signed the surrender document, and as he's putting the pen down, a signal was given at the door. And the gun went off and shook the hut. And it would have given him shell shock at the same time, because everybody in the hut knew that what was going to happen, but he didn't. And that signal was a signal to our unit, the 2nd 3rd Anti-Aircraft Regiment, to fire a 21-gun salute. When they heard that mortar go off for the victory salute, we never had any blanks, so they fired them out to sea. But all that's unofficial. That's my story. December the 10th, 1945, and I was in the office trying to haggle with some cigarettes for some development material. And I heard an engine start up on a plane, and I had my camera with me. And then the engine revved up and I heard the plane going down the runway to take off. And suddenly I heard the engine stop and I heard an almighty bang. The aircraft had crashed. And of course we raced out and I had my camera and had gone into a ditch. Everybody on it was killed. But while I was there, the chap came up, he said, come back straight away. 2 ships are coming to take us home. And that was a point in my time I'll never forget. Because on one side of me, I had a tragedy where people in Australia are going to receive some terrible news, and I just received some good news. I'll never forget that. But I was going home and they weren't. 2 ships came into the port. They were called victory ships, about 20,000 tons. They're made to carry cargo only, no passengers. 1,500 soldiers got on each ship that weren't made to carry any people at all. We thought Australia would have forgotten about us. It was the 9th Division coming home. But they hadn't. All the ships along we passed, big or small, they all fired their water hoses into the air welcoming us home. There was a troop train standing by to take us home, but the people of Brisbane had other ideas. They wanted to give us a welcome home, and they loaded us in the backs of trucks and they drove us slowly down the main street of Brisbane to a ticker tape welcome home. I felt little bits of paper falling on me. We were wet from a shower of rain. We were dirty, we were hungry, but we didn't care. We were going home. And when the troop trains came into the Adelaide railway station, I was on it. It was 10:30, Christmas morning, 1945. That was the best Christmas present I ever had in my life, was to get off that train onto the Adelaide railway station. My father picked me up and brought me home. It was a wonderful feeling to walk up my front door after 6 years, knowing I'd never have to go away again.
Flight Lieutenant Lyle Ehlers joined the RAAF in 1942. He was just 18. Lyle served in 4 different World War II squadrons, flying Tiger Moths, Wirraways and Boomerangs. During his 2 tours overseas, Lyle flew low-altitude, high-risk reconnaissance and combat missions, providing air support to ground troops.
My father had been in the army in the First World War, so when things started to get a bit hectic in the early days, I decided I'd better go and join up. So I went and joined the Air Force, put my name down to join there with my brother, my older brother, John, and I joined together. The tour was 9 months in New Guinea. We spent most of our time doing artillery shoots with the army and quite a bit of the time flying in Jap territory looking for transport. They used to bring their trucks down from Madang through the mountains, and we used to fly up there every day, quite often early in the morning, and looking for these trucks that they brought down to service all their troops at a place called Shaggy Ridge. At dawn, they'd drive the trucks off the roads and cover them with branches. You then look for clumps of bushes and there'd be a truck in it. So we used to shoot them up. We had incendiaries as well as tracers. That was one of our jobs. The other one was we had a couple of Wirraways. We were at a place called Goosap, not far from the US Army airstrip. And we used to have what they called torpedoes, which were about 6 foot high, and we filled them up with cigarettes and lollies and toothpaste, anything the army didn't have, because they were at 4,500 feet up on Shaggy Ridge. So we'd take these 2 torpedoes on a Wirraway and fly up there and try and drop them on the ridge, which was 50 feet wide. So if the wind blew, the torpedoes would go down one side or the other, and they'd be a race between the Japs and our troops to get them. All our flying was below 1,000 feet because the jungle had these giant trees and everything, and you just couldn't see anything unless you got down low. And also it was important to stay down on the treetops, because if you got up too high, the Japs could shoot at you. But if you were just at 100 feet or less, you'd be gone before they could shoot you. The Air Force is not like the Army or the Navy. They go somewhere and stay there for 5 years. In the Air Force, you might only be in a squadron for 9 months, then you'll be shifted somewhere else. And I was in 4 different squadrons. I met 4 different lots of pilots, but very seldom ever saw them again. You didn't really make great friends of anyone because you were never together for long enough. That's just the way it was. I went up to northwest New Guinea, an island called Numfa, and joined 78 Squadron flying Kitty Hawks. From there, we went to Morotai, to 78 Squadron. We carried 2 250-pound bombs, and the Kitty Hawk had 6.5 caliber machine guns. From Morotai, we then went to Borneo to Tarakan. The same job over there, dropping bombs, supporting the army. So that was my Air Force life. When the war was over in August 45, my time was up. I'd done my second 9 months, so they sent me home to Perth to be discharged.
For the last few months of his Air Force career, Lyle was the commanding officer in charge of the training camp at Geraldton.
And this is the view of Pennington Gardens, just opposite St Peter's Cathedral, where the Cross of Sacrifice service will get underway very soon. We're just awaiting the arrival of the Governor, Her Excellency, the Honourable Frances Adamson. And there she is there. The Cross of Sacrifice, known as the Women's War Memorial, commemorates those who died in service or were killed in action. It was actually paid for by the women of South Australia. And the plaque there reads, "To the glory of God and the imperishable memory of the men who gave their lives in the Great War, the tribute of the women of South Australia."
And really the third and final component of our commemoration trilogy this morning.
And this site was chosen for the space it allowed, with the idea of creating an atmosphere of peace and reverence. And as just mentioned, this service signifies the finale of the trilogy of commemorations. We had the dawn service, which is the funeral service, the march, which signifies the march to the burial site, and the Cross of Sacrifice symbolises the burial.
My understanding is that the Governor, rightly so, values this particular role that she has very highly.
Yeah, she's very supportive indeed, and keeps up a punishing schedule.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the arrival of Her Excellency the Honourable Frances Adamson, AC Governor of South Australia, and Mr Bunton, along with the Acting RS of the State President. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the mounting of the catapult party. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The service of remembrance conducted following our march is unique to this state. Officially opened in 1922, these gardens were developed and funded by women for women, especially for widows seeking to honour the sacrifice of the men who died in the Great War. Known as the Garden of Memory, with the cross of sacrifice at one end and the stone of remembrance at the other, these gardens have now become a place of peace and reflection of all generations, as we remember all, men and women, young and old, who have served this nation with sacrifice and distinction. Not only do we gather in the shadow of St. Peter's Cathedral, but more significantly, in the shadow of Easter, where we remembered the greatest sacrifice the world has known, the crucifixion and death of Jesus. Indeed, it is by that sacrifice we have come to understand all sacrifice, hence our memorial is a cross. And if you look from above, a mirror image of the cathedral itself, also in the shape of a cross. The hymn, O Valiant Hearts, written by Sir John Stanhope Arkwright in 1925, captures this very connection between the sacrifice of Jesus and those in war, and it offers a theme of hope, that those who have given of themselves freely in sacrifice, like Christ, will also share with him that same hope of resurrection to new life. Let us stand together and sing, O Valiant Hearts. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We pause now for our prayers of remembrance. We remember, O Lord, those members of the Australian military forces who made the supreme sacrifice in times of war. We thank you for their courage, skill, dedication and willingness to serve. We pray that the offering of their lives not be in vain. May your grace enable us to honour their legacy and dedicate our lives to the same cause of justice, freedom and peace. We remember this day too the widows and other loved ones who have been grieved through war. Comfort them with your presence and through family and friendships. We pray for our veterans. We thank you for their service in defence of our nation and to defend their lives, well-being and freedom of others. Strengthen and encourage them and help those who continue to suffer the effects of war to know healing and recovery. We pray for our current serving members. We remember those who currently serve our nation, including those deployed on operations. We ask for safety amidst chaos, wisdom in decision-making, refreshment for the fatigued, and peace over anxiety. The hymn, Eternal Father Strong to Save, written by William Whiting in 1860, is inspired by Psalm 107 and the story of Jesus calming the stormy seas. A mainstay in navies for generations, it inspires hope and faith amidst the darkness and chaos of stormy seas, and reminds us that no matter how dark and chaotic life is, Christ still has authority and power and meets us there in the midst of it all. I invite you again to stand together as we sing Eternal Father, Strong to Save. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. In a moment, we will have the laying of 3 wreaths, followed by the ode, last post, and minute silence and rouse. First, a brief word of explanation. A memorial such as this represents our fallen. Memorials are made to symbolise before us the bodies of those who may be lost or buried far away. This symbolises them being before us this morning. Wreaths have been used since ancient times to honour courage and bravery, as well as for mourning. In ancient times, a deceased body waiting for burial might be laid on a large stone, a catafalque, and guarded by soldiers. This is why we have a catafalque party with arms, respectfully guarding and protecting the fallen. If you were to stay in barracks, you would be woken each morning by the trumpet playing of rouse and sent to sleep at night with the last post. Here they are reversed. The last post signifies that our fallen have now gone to sleep in death, and our minute's silence is to let them do so, not to awaken them. The flag goes to half-mast, symbolising our grief and our sadness. But then the silence is broken by the rouse, a call to wake up. This expresses the Easter hope we have, that death is not the end of the story. Instead, we look forward to resurrection and new life again. And so the flag returns to full mast, declaring that death is defeated and that our hope for new life wins the day. I invite Her Excellency, Governor Francis Adamson, AC, to now lay a wreath. I invite the representatives of Legacy Youth, Tyler and Charlotte Locke, to come forward and place their tribute. I invite the representative for the Australian War Widows, Jan Grosvenor, to come forward and place a tribute book. We come to the reciting of the Ode of Remembrance from Lawrence Binyon's poem, For the Fallen. It will be recited for us by Jan Milham, a war widow. Following this, please stand fast for the playing of the last post, minute silence and rouse. I invite Jan Milham forward to read the Ode.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Everybody, attention. Everybody, reason.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We have gathered in remembrance of the men and women who have served this nation with distinction, many at the cost of their lives. All have set an example for us to follow. And in this special garden we have remembered too the widows and families who have grieved the loss of husbands, fathers, sons and uncles, and indeed of all who have suffered loss. And now may you find and know the encouragement and comfort of God's presence on this day of remembrance. May Almighty God bless and enable you to live justly, to love mercy and to walk humbly, and to serve him, one another and his creation. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain upstanding for the playing of the national anthems of New Zealand and Australia.
Everybody, present, arms.
And that was the national anthem, bringing to us the conclusion of the service of remembrance at the Cross of Sacrifice in Pennington Gardens opposite St Peter's Cathedral. It's a significant part of the Anzac Day commemorations following the dawn service and of course the Anzac March, where we saw so many of those veterans.
Yes, and Richard, let's hear now some more about one of our veterans who we saw a little bit earlier in the march. 101-year-old Diana Watson had just left school at 18 when she followed in her father's footsteps and signed up for the Army. She trained and served as a driver and searchlight operator in the 58th Anti-Aircraft Searchlight Battery, which was based in South Australia during World War II.
It really was quite fun. Other than the rookie school where you learnt to clean baths with kerosene and windows with damp newspaper and march, and then they had air raid practices and they had a drill for gas masks and all those things. I wanted to be a driver, I went in to be a driver, but in the meantime we learnt how to work searchlights. During the day you would make sure your engine generator was in good order, you would make sure that it had oil and that it was running. You cleaned the inside of the searchlight, which had a reflector in it. And then at night, when it got dark, you would go out and start your generator and move your searchlight around the sky, do it by hand. At least I did anyway. And then if there were a plane or anything that seemed a bit unnerving, you'd be woken up at 2 in the morning and have to dash out of bed, get dressed in 2 minutes and be on your way. Then they moved me to a telephone exchange in a terribly secret place, which was somewhere in the bottom end of Adelaide somewhere. We had to go down steps and we never really quite knew where we were. And having done that for a little while, they said the driving and maintenance school was ready to take us. So we had actually a very pleasant time driving around in the hills. No petrol rationing, of course, for the Army. Having passed the driving exams, we would drive ration trucks. Every morning the ration trucks would go out with all the food in them for the day to our various stations. They had searchlights in them, places down at Somerton and places at Two Worlds, places at Virginia, I think, places at Cross Keys. The whole unit was disbanded and the war went on for another 3 years after. I enjoyed it. It was an experience. I'm glad I had it. I wouldn't have known if I'd missed it, but there were a lot of things you learnt. And I think you saw a very wide selection of the community, which has always interested me anyway, so even then I like to know what people were doing. I was Nosy Parker, I think.
At 94 years old, Korean war veteran Patrick Forbes has just completed his last Anzac Day march. For Mr Forbes, it was a chance to remember the proud legacy he's created with his father and brothers. This story from the ABC's James Wakelin.
Patrick Forbes turns the pages on his family's war history.
1914, he was the first Sword of Honour winner.
He's decided this Anzac Day parade will be his last.
I'll be nearly 95 and I'm not going to be doing it again. And I wanted to in some way show that the family had been involved when involvement was necessary. Well, I'm proud of them.
Well, Anzac Day is incredibly special every year, but, you know, for our family, you know, this will be Dad's last march. We're not only sort of very proud of his service, but we're very proud of his brothers, my grandfather and uncles and so on.
The Forbes family has a special place in Australia's war history. It's believed to be the only family to have been awarded the Military Cross for gallantry in 3 successive conflicts. Patrick's father, Alexander Forbes, a Duntroon graduate, was recognised for his leadership in helping take Pozieres in France in World War I. His brother, Lieutenant Jim Forbes, who went on to become a minister in the Menzies Liberal government, was acknowledged for his inspiring leadership and coolness under fire in New Guinea in World War II, while Patrick was said to have shown courage when holding back repeated enemy attacks in Korea.
Anybody who says they aren't frightened is stupid, in my humble opinion. But you don't think about the person who's firing shells at you. Or you're worried about yourself, if you're worrying about it at all, and so you do it the best way you can.
Some pictures in Korea.
But in recent years, Patrick Forbes' mind has returned to Korea as he reflects on the final days before an armistice agreement was signed. He recalls how 3,000 Chinese soldiers were sent to their deaths when their superiors ordered them to breach an area Australian and American forces were defending.
To me, that if anything's ever pushed home the futility of decisions for seeing, it was that.
Patrick Forbes says if there's one lesson that he's learned, it's that war should be avoided at all cost.
There is nothing nice about war in any shape or form. We want to admire the people who did well, but we don't want to glorify it. That I really began to think about a lot later on.
The lifelong suffering, I think that gets forgotten sometimes, that those that returned, you know, they didn't have any counselling support, they had nothing and they had to battle away on their own, and I think that's very sad.
As he's preparing to march with his sons Richard and Jonathan for a final time, Patrick Forbes is also appreciating that the sacrifice and service that generations past made will continue to be acknowledged.
The number of people watching the march has increased very considerably, and so history is starting to play a part in this, the whole thing. I think that's important. I think you should have a sense of history. It's not a sense of celebration.
A history he hopes future generations can avoid.
Certainly a very important message there. Now, the Headstone Project is a volunteer organisation searching for the forgotten graves of World War I veterans and giving recognition to those who have served. This story from the ABC's Emma Masters.
94-year-old Jack Hanna's father served in the First World War. Private Richard Hanna was lucky to return home, and he died decades later when Jack was a teenager. Jack knew his dad was buried here in this Adelaide Hills cemetery, but wasn't sure where the grave was located until now.
But before, I used to go a couple of times, got off and go out there. I think that's where he was. I couldn't tell.
We didn't know for sure, just perhaps where that was his dad, but he will know now.
It's a way of giving these men the recognition that they so long have not had.
All right, so we are after Crookshank.
And these volunteers are on a sombre mission of finding the forgotten graves of World War I veterans.
All right, that's Featherstone on that side, Hopkins on that side.
They take on countless cemetery visits and detailed archival research with the hope of honouring those who served with an official service and headstone.
Making sure we've got the right person in the grave, their military history, their family history, and then we start to look for the living descendants.
In South Australia alone, it's believed there are about 2,500 unmarked sites.
But at the moment, we've got a list of about 50 that we could do, pending funding, and we've got a list of about 420 possibles around the state.
Diggers were lost for many reasons, from Spanish flu, disconnection from family, and the Great Depression.
Grieving family had to consider whether they would put food on the table, pay the rent, or put a marker on a loved one's grave.
The plight of the lost soldiers is inspiring Adelaide school students to lend a helping hand, looking for unmarked graves and getting a hands-on history lesson along the way.
We're just researching a nurse that was involved in World War I. Her name's Edith Cox. And yeah, this is her gravesite. So we're just having a look at the damage that's been made and how we can hopefully repair and restore it.
Private Hannah's dedication was partly funded through a federal program. But volunteer groups are struggling to cover additional costs and overheads.
Where we go beyond this, I frankly don't know.
But they're vowing to continue as long as possible.
We're doing it for the families, and to see the families there, see them reunited with a long-lost forebear.
For the Hannahs, it's invaluable work that has made a difference to their family and a soldier who served.
I'm just pleased that he's been recognised for what he's worth. He's not forgotten.
It's a wonderful thing that that is happening, that all these soldiers are being recognised. Yes, they earned it. They really did. But to us as a family, it's been a great thing.
They say I'm just like my dad.
Kids couldn't see it at all.
Emma Masters with that report. Now, this year marks the 100th anniversary of signals in the Australian Defence Forces. We take a look at the various roles the Signal Corps has played over the past 100 years and how they've evolved.
The story of their recontact with civilization is one of the epics of the war. With a few odds and ends, signallers began to build a radio transmitter. They scrounged for everything, going time and again through the Jap lines to do it. And after many heartbreaking failures, they got a signal through to Darwin. When they heard Darwin order all stations off the air to prevent interference, those lost nomads got the kind of thrill that comes to few men.
This Royal Australian Corps of Signals is at the heart of Australian military operations, providing, protecting and evolving military communications.
Our primary role as a signaller is to convey voice communications and data communications all the way from the bottom of the battlefield all the way to the tippity top.
Telephoning corrections to the signaller below, who passes the message on to the artillery officer.
From semaphore flags 100 years ago to satellite communications today, from message forms to cyberspace, the communications that we provide have evolved significantly over the last 100 years.
Signals, to a degree, is the silent achiever. We are a supporting arms corps. I think the importance of the signals is that even though it's not highly advertised, we are at every peacekeeping mission, every deployment, we're behind the scenes.
I think we've all seen the movies for World War I and World War II and even Vietnam, and in every single movie that you've ever seen, you can always remember someone getting injured and someone screaming medic. Every time there's a medic, there's a signaller right behind him, because without that medic, you're not getting that person evacuated from that area. We're still affectionately known as chooks because when we were tapping Morse code, it sounded like a chicken's beak tapping on a desk.
Instruction is being given here on an Army 5-kilowatt transmitter operating into a dummy load.
Joining in the late 80s, we were still working on equipment and hardware from the Vietnam era. So we were still working on analogue radios, no data capabilities. So situational awareness really was just based on small networks, small information. And the capabilities of those radios, as technology grows, that's where defence is really able to boost those up. So the evolution in defence is tenfold because the threats are now tenfold from a cyber perspective, from what our adversaries are doing. And it's only to look at the latest conflicts now to understand how complex that environment is.
0 Alpha, this is 0 Delta, radio check, over.
The Royal Australian Corps of Signals will continue to evolve to meet the challenges of cyber, space and electronic warfare. Future conflicts will also be fought in the digital domain, and our signallers will be at the forefront, protecting our communications, our networks and our data from emerging threats.
Without communications, there's no battlefield management. So there's no command and control, there's no informed decision making, there's no situational awareness, so absolutely critical.
This centenary is a moment to reflect on their contributions, to reflect on our Corps' history and to look ahead to the future of the Corps.
It's a proud moment for the Corps. It's a proud moment for everyone to be recognised for their services and what they have achieved over the years. So, to have them leading the march and the association close behind them is quite a moment.
Marching this Anzac Day, it's hard to put into words until you're wearing the uniform and you're surrounded by your peers and everyone that's supporting you, and your family are on the sidelines cheering for you. That's what it means to me. It's everything.
Well, we are just about at the conclusion of our Anzac Day coverage. Bill, some final thoughts. How did this morning go?
I think it went very well, Jessica. We were blessed with good weather. We had good numbers. Sadly, the numbers of older veterans are declining, as we see every year. But I was heartened by the fact that there are a lot of seem to be more contemporary veterans embracing the tradition. So I think in the end we can look at it and say that the Anzac legend was commemorated appropriately. All service was recognised and successful.
Bill, what will be the activities this afternoon across the state for these veterans?
Well, hopefully a lot will go back to Torrens Parade Ground and enjoy some camaraderie there, but others will go to pubs for reunions, but a large number, as I said earlier, will go, I think, off for family events and get together with their families, particularly the younger veterans who find that a really good way to commemorate.
It'd be nice for people to go and share some stories and have a drink.
Sharing stories, you're right.
Well, stay with the ABC for live coverage of the Gallipoli Dawn service in Turkey. That's coming up very shortly, followed by the commemorative service from Villers Bretonneux in France. And you can, of course, catch up on all the coverage from across Australia and overseas on iView a little bit later today. And that's something that people will be able to see services from all over the country, which is great. I'm Richard Davies.
I'm Jessica Harmson and this is Bill Denny. Thank you very much for joining us. That concludes our coverage of Anzac Day commemorations here in Adelaide. We do, of course, continue to remember and honour our men and women who've served and continue to serve in times of conflict and peace.
Good afternoon from the Gardens of Remembrance in Adelaide.